Hey everybody.
Oh, are we still on the SIG architecture meeting? Oh, I thought I just got out of it.
No, you're here. You're in the right place.
Oh, cool.
This is SIG Release now.
Yep.
Um, so we've rolled into SIG Release. People are still rolling in. Stephen,
He's going to be out for 15 minutes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I actually have to leave after 30 minutes. So I actually haven't been attending this call the last few anyway. But I want to do a 10 today. I don't know if Tina's here.
So we have a couple of topics today, right? Stephen was speaking. One is I wanted to present the Nefro development release process, and I think Vishwanath also had a presentation on the PR process, right?
I didn't have a presentation. I had a question. Basically, I wanted to be discussed. So, and maybe that might be covered by a development process. I was going to be asking like, hey, how are we going to go about the review process, basically, right? Before we start merging. So if that is going to be covered by yours, Arvind, maybe we can skip mine until you finish the presentation.
Oh, it looks like
Okay,
Stephen,
yeah.
were you able to make it earlier, Stephen? Or is it that you're like driving or something? I didn't read your note close.
Oh, me?
Yeah. You thought you said you weren't going to make it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I probably, no, actually, I haven't even, it's so late, I haven't even started to drop off my kid yet. So I'll probably have to drop off for about 20 minutes actually in the middle of this. Yeah, I mean, Tina's not here. So while going around, I guess, Vish, do you have any questions or do you want to, you put an agenda item?
Somebody, if you're going to have to drop off, and I have to drop off, why don't you appoint somebody as the honorary chair for today?
I'm going to be in this meeting. I can help, but actually, I think Arvind has a big presentation that answers your question, Vish, as well.
Yeah.
So I would say, Arvind, go ahead and drive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Arvind.
So Stephen, it might be that's what Arvind was talking about it, and I was saying that his development process presentation might answer some of the questions I raised.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We can try. Hopefully, some of it is.
Yeah. Let's go with. Go ahead, Arvind.
Arvind, are you speaking? We can't hear you.
Arvind, you're on mute.
Sorry.
When you share, if you share, it will share the tab audio. There's a little checkbox you have to uncheck.
Oh,
Otherwise,
I see. Okay.
It's just
Yeah, I was getting muted automatically. I'm like, what's going on?
99.9% of the time you don't want to share the tab audio. So I don't know why they make that default that way.
Yeah, you're muted again.
Sorry, 1 second. So once I share my tab, where
you'll
is the
see
option?
When you click share, it brings up the list of tabs to share. At the bottom, there's a checkbox.
It is it says share tab audio, right? That is checked
Unclick
already.
that. Yeah, unclick that.
Oh, unclick that. I see. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. This is very quirky. Okay. Can you see my screen? At least the development release process document. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is just a proposal at this point, right? So what I've tried to do is list down a lot of different things that we as SIG3 need to look into, mostly revolving around the development and the release process and the test infrastructure and everything that goes in this process, right? So that's the high-level goal of this doc, to just kind of list out and get us to start thinking on these different aspects, right? So first things first, maybe we can get started with the release cycle. So the release cycle, the proposal is to follow the semantic versioning guidelines, which is, let's say, x.y.z is every release, and then I'll jump to this for a second. So x.y.z is a given release, and then x is the major version, y is the minor, and z is the patch version. It is for us to define what major and minor means exactly. But for now, let's just keep this as the mental model that we have x.y.c as the release version. X is major, y is minor, and z is patch. Now, major release is, this is how I'm thinking about it. There is no recurring release cadence per se. It's more like if we make any incompatible API changes or things of that nature, as called out in semantic, that could be what major release means, right? And this is again for us to decide. I'm just saying this could be one way of thinking about it. Minor release is where most of the meat happens, and we need to come up with a release cadence for this. I just put some number there. It could be something like 3 months, for example. So every 3 months you have a minor release. So let's say you start with 1.0.0, the first Nephio version release official. Whenever that once that happens, then every 3 months you will have 1.1, 1.2, and so on, right? That's how I was thinking about it. So when it comes to this minor release, yeah, go ahead.
So Arvind, couple of questions there. Thanks for putting together this document to start with. Appreciate that. So the two things one we need to figure out is what version of Kubernetes that our Nephio is compatible with. That's one thing. So should we kind of piggyback on the Kubernetes releases? I think it's once in 6 months. Is that right?
Kubernetes is once in 4 months. So every year they have 3 minor releases, basically.
3 minor releases. Okay. So, so that's where my couple of questions are. One is, obviously, when we do the Nephio, we need to have that compatibility of which Kubernetes version it's going to work with. So for that, and should we also piggyback on the K8s release? What should we do in that regard? That's it's kind of a very overarching question, because we may be compatible, we may not be compatible with the latest release at all. That's fine, absolutely fine. If it is 1.25, we may be compatible with 1.24. So in general, it's kind of a bigger question, like should we, when a release of Kubernetes releases, and let's say 1 month later we release, should we be compatible with that latest Kubernetes release?
No, it's a great point, a great question. I think John has his hand raised. I'm assuming
Yes.
going to weigh in. Yeah, please go ahead, John.
So my preference would be to minimize our dependency on specific Kubernetes versions as much as possible. Kubernetes versions things by API. And where there's going to be APIs we use, for example, we use the CRD API to define our schemas. We clearly have a strong dependency on that. But once those are V1, which most of them are today, almost everything of substance is now already V1, or will be within the next couple of releases. Things like Gateway, I think, isn't quite V1 yet. They have very strong backward compatibility guarantees. So I agree we should say what versions we're compatible with, but it should be more like Kubernetes, 1.22 or higher. Like it should be very light. And where we have to be careful is when we take a dependency on a new Kubernetes API. So if in 1.27, they add a feature for CRDs, some new field, we shouldn't rely on that in our standard Nephio CRDs until, a few cycles later. Now, vendors may end up relying for their specific instance on features that are part of Kubernetes. Like I don't know, Daniel's not here, but Daniel I know is working with SIG network in Kubernetes on multi-networking, like an upstream multis replacement effectively. Like that's going to be a few years, but eventually, some vendors may take a dependency on that, but that'll be years down the road. So that's my opinion. We should be very careful and very lightweight on what dependencies we take there. From a testing point of view, Stephen, yes, good point. As this SIG, we should pick a Kubernetes version or two that we test with for each of our releases, but vendors who sell Nephio eventually would have to qualify on whatever ones their customers want, but we should, yeah. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
So we should definitely pick that's where the supportability, when there is a supportability, at least whatever things that we test on, the one thing. So the second question there, John, was the release cadence. Should we kind of mimic the release cadence?
I don't have a strong opinion on the release cadence other than we need one. So we don't necessarily need one.
I think his question was more specifically if we should line up our release cadence with K8s. My opinion is we should not. We should just pick a K8 release that we qualify against and we release in a few. We don't wait for, let's say, a particular K8 release to happen. Yeah, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, I think our release cadence should be independent and chosen for whatever reasons we want, and maybe it's even a TSC decision. But I think it's important that we have a train of releases. And like, I don't think it's necessarily important in the next year. I think the next year, maybe even the next 18 months, we're still making the first couple releases happen. But before too long, we need a steady train of releases that as we add functionality, you're either on the train or off the train. You know, you either make it or you don't. And we don't have to have drama about it. So that's kind of my opinion there. But as far as the specific cadence, I agree we shouldn't tie it to Kubernetes. I don't have a strong opinion about the specific cadence other than quarterly is probably way too fast for me.
I was thinking 6 months. Maybe that's where that's okay. So I think I got that was a good discussion. I think at least I got the clarity there. I mean, there is no need to tie up ours with a particular K8 release, and then by design, John understand that we should minimize our dependency on particular nuances of K8s in such a way that we should not depend too much on that, and our supportability is should be mostly coarse-grained rather than fine-grained. Like you said, it's 122 and above, rather than it says 122 or 123. So I think those are some of my questions. I think through these discussions, I think those were clarified. Thank you.
So
I'm curious, Bala, is there a reason why you were asking about tying this release to the Nephew releases to
those were those are very general questions. Some of them are very specific. And the thing is, from a testability perspective, we should definitely choose something, right? We should test on something that is there. And then I was trying to understand the desire. Is there any desire to tie up this with a particular K8's release? And is there any desire to have the same cadence as K8 I was trying, since I know John and others play a big role in Kubernetes as well. So that's where I was trying to understand the intent that will help all of us.
Right. So main question, I'm documenting the questions also, so I can add some of the details to the doc. So basically 2 questions, right? Which K8 release should Nephew depend on? So now the question is, let's say there is 1.2, 1.25, like do we test against all of this, which we cannot do, obviously. So we pick, we need to decide, like how do we pick which K8 release? Maybe we pick the last most stable K8 release and qualify against that. That could be one approach. So that's something we need to decide on, right?
Yeah, exactly. We need to, at least for the testing purpose, we need to pick one.
Exactly. So we need to pick one, but then John, go ahead. I'm sure John has.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment, like just for provide some context. So Kubernetes releases every 4 months, and I believe our current supported time for releases is about a year. And so, you know, we don't necessarily want to go back much. Like we don't want to pick the most recent one because nobody's on the most recent one, right? But we should probably test with the oldest still supported version or something like that.
So K8, I'll weigh in here, right? K8 supports up to 3 versions at any given point in time, right? So those are the things. Everything else is in deprecated. 3 of them are in maintenance mode, right? So our choice now is validate against all 3 or just pick the most recent, maybe not the most recent, maybe the middle one, right? The most recent is probably not many people are living on it. So,
yeah, I mean, we can pick the middle one to start. Like nobody's on the most recent one. Like, so just to be like, I don't know a Red Hat, but for GKE, just in the last year, we've gotten to the point where we get the most recent Kubernetes into our rapid channel within 30 days of release, right? So, and then it takes at least another quarter. That's a rapid channel, which most customers don't use for production workloads, right? Like, so most people are, like you said, at least one release behind, if not two. Our stable channel tends to be, 2 releases behind, but always in a supported release. So I think it's fine to go with the oldest supported release, but that means, we are upgrading our test infrastructure every 4 months as the releases fall off their deprecation. So this SIG will have to decide whether that's reasonable or not. If we use a hosted Kubernetes for at least some of it, then some of that can be managed for us. But.
I'll add, Kubernetes has gotten, I won't say it's as mature as other projects, but it's mature enough that it's being quite conservative with features.
Yes.
I don't see us using any Kubernetes feature, gated feature, or otherwise that would be become an issue. If it does come up, we could tie things to specific release and say this version of Nephew does have a minimum, but I kind of feel that in the telco industry, especially, very conservative. We should probably not rely on any unique feature coming up in Kubernetes and really maintain back compatibility.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, we want to reduce the variables because Nephew itself is going to change quite a bit over time, right? So we want to at least keep K stable. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to, test all the combinations.
Yeah, there's one other point I wanted to mention. This is regarding the cadence itself. My experience is both telcos and the NF providers both are very slow to changes in the platform. So releasing it every quarter, for example, just like what we do in Kale, is maybe too much, or for both network function vendors and telecoms to adopt. That is on the second bullet point. Yeah.
Right, understood. So sorry, I'm just trying to paraphrase what everyone is saying, right? So we shouldn't rely on the more recent K8 release features. That's understood. But then now, like John was mentioning, every release gets deprecated, right? It's a moving train, if you will. And at any point in time, 3 releases are valid, and then one of them will get deprecated, another one will get added. So it will constantly be changing. For us, at least for the first, let's say 6 months to a year of Nephew, I'm thinking maybe that's how, for example, let's say 1.25 is the stable one. When the only thing, when they don't maintain, all it means is they're not going to do security patches and things of that nature. For now, at least, should we not worry about that until we figure out the Nephew model? Maybe stick with pick 1.25 and stick with it. Even if it's not maintained. Is that what you guys are saying? Thinking, or more like we have to keep adapting? Because we have 2 options there, right? I have my opinions, but I won't.
I mean, there's 2 different things, right? There's what we state we support. Like, are we taking a dependency on some feature, like Tal was saying, that's only available in the newer Kubernetes?
That we should not.
It's a different question than, are we testing with old Kubernetes? Like, I think from a test perspective, we should be, until we have, so as an open source project, I mean, I would think we go, like what I said, with the oldest Kubernetes that's still under support. As a Google product, eventually, if there is one, like, we would work with our customers to figure out what versions of Kubernetes, because we'd be hosting that anyway, we're supporting, and we would test and qualify those specific combinations, and that would be our issue. And if Red Hat I hope, or Nokia, or other people I hope one day have their own Nephew product they sell, they would do the same thing, and it's out of the scope of this project. So I think that for our own sake, we don't want our test clusters hacked, right? Like, I think it makes sense to run on the oldest supported version. But that's really, I'm only a participant here. It'll be up to the SIG here to decide how to do that.
No, but yeah. Thank you, John. So that means I'm just trying to get a sense of what everyone is thinking, right? So that means roughly every 8 months we have to update, right? Because if a given Kubernetes release gets released, after that it's maintained for roughly 8 months, right? So that means every 8 months at least we might have to move Nephew, even if we don't need any particular feature from the Kubernetes release.
Yeah, Aravind, it's Wim here. Can we test with more than one release, or do we have the infrastructure to do so?
I guess we could. It's just that it just adds more variables, because testing is one thing. If it breaks, then we have to go triage, debug.
If there are flakes, if there are, I mean, like, and it's expense.
So it
right?
is
it's expense too. So I think we'll learn over time. We have to. I don't think we should start with that. I'll say that. I think we should start with one version and test.
Agree.
And then,
No, I agree. Yeah, and I agree with taking the oldest supported one. It's probably the most likely to be used.
Yeah, exactly. So oldest supported one, and that just means that roughly, which means roughly every 8 months we need to change.
I think every 4 months, not?
No, like let's say let's say Kubernetes releases 1.25.0. Let's say it's released today. From today, up to 8 months they maintain it, and then the maintenance goes away.
Yeah, but we would be on the old one. We'd be running. So every 4 months there's a new one. Every 4 months ours would fall out of. Since we're on the oldest one, it would fall.
No. Sorry.
That's okay in my view, because by the time we release, that depends on our release cadence, right? Let's say we release 1 March, and let's say we decide on 6 months cadence, then probably for the next release, whatever that makes sense, the next release for Kubernetes is what we choose.
Yeah, probably each release we would probably update it. It makes me think of how we have a similar issue in Kubernetes with Go. So Go had a, they just made some changes in part for us, like around their support cycles. But like we had issues where, like, when do we upgrade to the newer version of Go? Right before Kubernetes release or whatever, right? So it was always a little bit of a judgment call based on where the timings fell. But I think we'll have a similar thing. But for now, I think that's okay. We actually have the same issue with Go, but I think that we're still early in the cycle. It's not an issue.
Okay, so tentatively we can say this is what we are all thinking, right? Is that we'll pick the oldest one. So that means, like you guys were saying, it's roughly the last 4 months. So every 4 months we will be updating TIs used by Nephew. We can start with this and then see how it goes and then iterate if there is a better approach. Is that reasonable?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So let's go back to what we were doing. Yeah, thanks for the question, Balaji. Yeah, appreciate it. So this is,
just 1 second.
go ahead.
I have to drop off, but I just wanted to, and maybe it's all the same people here. So, but I put a document in the SIG automation Slack that's starting to list out what we need to do in R1. Part of that's components. I would love, but part of that has to be, what does this SIG need to provide with respect to build pipelines and all of the stuff you've got right here, Aravind. So I would just like for folks to take a look at that sometime today, if you can, with both hats on, SIG automation hat, development hat, and SIG release build hat, and make sure, not make sure, start adding stuff, because I only added like 2 or 3 items. So there's almost nothing in there, but there's a big preface about the scope of that. So I have to drop, but I would appreciate if folks could look at that today. Thank you so much.
John, one question. Do you want us to add as comments, or do you just want to add inline text?
most of you should have, we've had issues with the permissions in the drive. In theory, a lot of you should have edit access. If you have edit access, just add stuff. That's fine. If you
Okay.
don't, you definitely should have comment because the world has comment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah. So let's discuss the release cadence a little bit. I know there's a lot of different opinions. I just put some number here so that we can kind of open the forum to discuss, right? So I just want to hear what people have in mind. I heard 6 months. Balaji, Wim, thought you guys had some comments, right? Go ahead.
The main reason, one of the main reasons, see, this is very specific to telcos that we are doing, right? This is not a very generic product. Whereas Kubernetes or any other products are generally the scope is very wide. This one is very scope is network function vendors, platform vendors, and the telecommunication service providers. So my personal experience is both network function vendors and more so telecommunication players, they're very slow to changes. Once they put one version, they have three or four different environments. They have a development environment, they have a test environment, then they have a pre-staging, and then staging, and then production. So every department has to sign off before it goes to the next stage. This is the telecommunication deployment scenario,
right?
I was mentioning. So
right.
Once something in production, they're very slow to changes.
Right.
So,
no, I hear that, right? And I second that also. So I'll tell you what my line of thought was when I was like putting 3 months, right? So in general, let's say Nifio is becoming a real product and people are starting to use it, like you are saying, Balaji, like totally that makes sense, right? I 100% agree. So, but given where we are and we are in the initial stages, I worry about if it's 6 months once release, and given we are iterating, we won't have any, how do I say it? We want to have a reasonable velocity at the beginning because we are just evolving, right? Like we are very new. So that's the reason I was thinking maybe when we start, until we get some critical mass of features in a few ends, we could have 3 months. It is at least my line of thinking. But yeah, I'm happy to hear comments. I think Wish Tal, you guys have your hands raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw you put the 3 month, I was thinking more about feature velocity, and I tend to agree with Bala. But I think Bala, for another 1 year, I don't think, at least for the next 18 months, I don't see this in production, I guess. It will be more like people wanting to probably use it in their labs, test it out. I think between 3 months and 6 months, I would probably pick 4 months, in general, but yeah.
No, I hear you. I mean, that's the balance, right? Between feature velocity and also not, overburning ourselves and overcommitting.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
So in the sense, like, there are other things coming into play. I mean, I definitely want this community to be more collaborative with more people coming in, wanting to make some sort of a contribution, and they probably want to jump in, right? So will 3 months be better, 6 months be better, is something probably we can learn along the way,
Yes.
and then make adjustments. But I think the adoption definitely in production, I agree with what Bala has to say. But I think that is probably, you were trying to say this is like 18 months down the line before that gets adopted in production. Until then, it'll probably be more like, for us, this 3 month is more like, let's try to get some velocity going on.
Exactly.
And there'll be a bunch of people who want to be trying to, do some POCs in their labs, basically, is what I think.
Right.
Is my opinion. So it's I mean, you both have great points. Yeah.
No, in general, I share your sentiment, Vishwanath. Like, it's just that we are trying to balance between initially, right now, we are not like a production product yet, right?
Yeah.
So we want to have the velocity, but once it goes a little bit mature and we have like a critical mass of features, then to Balaji's point, we probably want to scale back a little bit on the release cycle, is what I think. Correct. 4 months sounds fine also,
yeah, because recently I also asked John to actually go create a tag for our workshop VM, We had one in November and we had a bunch of things that got recently added. It's more like trying to have something stable. That release is to have something stable so that people don't actually have to come back and say, oh, I tried this, it's broken. So 3 months
Right.
is at least what you came up with initially is something to probably like, yeah, let's see how it goes. And then we learn from it and adjust it accordingly.
Exactly. So this is not like once we decide it's the way
Okay.
forward for Nefio for the next few years, right? That is not it at all. We start somewhere, and then, like you're saying exactly, right? Iterate. If we think it's too much and we are not producing any good quality code in 3 months, and we think the process is overbearing, then we scale back a little bit to 4 months.
Okay,
But if
as
it
long
works
as
great,
you're,
then we can keep it.
yeah,
Yeah.
as long as we all agree with that, that sounds good.
Yeah.
At least my personal opinion.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, Tal has his hands raised. Tal, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to clarify the stakes here and maybe some experience from previous products. So having a high velocity, the key of calibrating it properly is the code freeze, right? Because if SIG number 3 needs to do the work of cutting a version for the release, they need to decide when the code freeze is. And there's pressure, right? On the one hand, the developers want the code freeze to happen as late as possible, right? So they can make changes as long as possible, right? But and release wants to push for the code freeze to be as early as possible so that they can have a stable work with no last minute huge changes that break everything, right? So the problem with this is setting that code freeze date properly for the cadence. I'll give you an example in ONAP, which is a much, much, much bigger project. They have a 6-month cadence for releases, but because it's so big, the code freeze has to happen pretty early. So you end up with almost a 3-month code freeze. So that means that you really only have 3 months of development, and then there's a code freeze. So you keep switching between 3 months development, 3-month code freeze, and then back to 3 months development. It could be very, very hard to work when you're constantly code freezing, right? So that's the problem with having very frequent releases, right? That it could really, really slow development and make it harder to do, right? Because if you're starting to make changes that are already for the next release, but then you have to backport fixes, maybe it could be painful. So I think those are what the stakes are, right? It's not about just like, hey, you know, if it was so easy to release, you can just have a release monthly, right? That was also a proposal that was discussed. Maybe we should just have a point release every month. Well, then when will the code freeze happen, right? So I think that's what we need to consider very carefully. So as I always say, the devil is in the details. So it's those points about the dates of when you start the release cycle and how the release cycle actually looks.
Yeah, thank you, Tal. Yeah, so let's go into the details, right? I think we should discuss the details. Let's just keep 3 months as like on the table for now, discuss the details, and then we can revisit the cadence and change it. I'm very open to changing this to whatever the community feels. But it has to be a balance between 3 and 6, because I feel 6 is a little bit too much out there, at least for a startup project which is what Nefio is. It's not in production, nobody is using it, so we need to have some velocity. Yeah, let's look at the details. Is that okay? We'll go through the details. We'll think about code freeze and everything that you mentioned, Tal. Yeah, so I'm just calling it phase 0 because before a release happens, everyone in SIG 3 and other SIGs need to know like what exactly they're looking at, what they are looking ahead for, right? So for example, if you're picking a 3-month release cycle, let's say it starts start of release cycle, let's say is March 1st, 2023. Then and again, all these dates we can discuss the duration, but just take the structure without worrying too much about the date for now. Let's say the start of release cycle is March 1st, right? Then we spend about 2 weeks to figure out what are the different features we want in that release. And this is a combination of SIG automation and SIG release. We have to kind of agree on this, that these are the features that are targeted, and we are okay with this, the number of features. Let's say once we took 2 weeks for us to agree on this. And then we work for a couple of months, like April 14, May 14. So it's roughly 2 months. And then we freeze code. And code freezes for roughly 2 weeks up until June 1st. And if a feature does not make it, let's say by code freeze, this is on SIG release, right? Whoever is the release lead, they kind of look at code freeze date and they go look at the open issues. And if whichever issue didn't make it into the code freeze, they have to go kind of follow up with the SIG automation or whoever is the owner for that issue to see if it can be moved to the next release. So that's the conversation and discussion that needs to happen at that point. And in many cases, those features will have to be moved to the subsequent release. And then for 2 weeks, the code freezes, we do integration testing, whatever other testing that we need to kind of do, end-to-end testing. And then we finalize the release in June 1st. And post-release, this needs to happen. We kind of need to go back and look at what happened. And if the process needs to change or whatever needs to change, we kind of discuss in the release postmortem. So that's the high level. And this kind of high level timeline with all the different processes will be published before the release process starts. That way, everybody in the community knows what to expect and how they can come in and kind of contribute, right? So now here I've just explained each of these steps in greater detail. Feature alignment is what we just discussed. We need to kind of agree on the features. And then we need to have a process on proposing features, right? Because we need to have a standard template on if we want to propose a feature, like what is the procedure? What is the format for that, right? We'll talk about that, but I just want to briefly introduce everything. Feature development happens 8 to 9 weeks. Code freeze and stabilization is roughly 2 weeks. And then we make the release official. And again, the timelines we can discuss, but roughly when a release is done, you will get code, you will get tests along with it, binaries, release notes, and documentation obviously needs to be updated for every feature we release. And then each release will be maintained roughly, let's say 6 months post-release. This is so that if, let's say this is the cadence we picked 3 months and we picked 6 months. What that means is at any point in time, there will be at least 2 valid releases from Nephew. For comparison, K8, like we discussed earlier, has 3 versions at any given time. I will stop there for questions, comments on any of these topics. The high-level phases, do they make sense? Are we missing something? What do you guys think?
Yeah,
Looks okay to me.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Vim.
No, looks good to me. I mean, we have to start with something, and it's a reasonable approach. So I think, yeah, I support
I
it.
agree. I would add, we are treating this first release as an experiment. So we're setting dates. I think we're all going to be very flexible about them. And the postmortem will give us data over this particular community, these particular individuals, and how they tend to work. So exactly. Every community is a little bit different. So yeah, we need this first stab just to figure it out, and it looks absolutely reasonable to me.
Okay. Yeah, because I really think release postmortem is when we will actually know. We do 1 or 2 releases, and then we all come in. We might have a completely different perspective from what we initially started with, right? So
definitely, once we choose the cadence, the details totally make sense. Alvin, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
exactly.
one thing I would obviously we all know this intuitively, but the feature alignment, that phase actually that may overlap with the previous cycle. For example, the planning might happen during the previous phase as well. For example, either through TSC or SIG1, SIG2. The planning for the next release may overlap. That's that we already know, but I think that's you intuitively implied. The feature alignment phase may overlap. That's the only thing I wanted to mention. But other than that, once we pick up a cadence, your plan sounds very reasonable at this point of time.
Okay.
Definitely a good first draft that will actually get, like to Tal's point, will
exactly. It's just a first cut that we have to pick a way to do it. And this is one of the ways. And then we'll iterate, right? There is no silver spoon here. Yeah.
So it's one of those things, we are looking at this plan, and then we probably tend to go back when we look at this document again. We'll probably have some comments to add and like, hey, how about this scenario? I mean, when I look at your code freeze of May 20th and finalized release on June 1st, I'm already looking at the Memorial Day weekend there with people thinking, hey, some of them will be out, right? I'm tuned to that way of thinking also.
Oh, so, yeah, exactly. Right? This is just like example. Yeah,
exactly. So those kind of other additional details will fall in place. And
Yes.
when we start reviewing that, I think we'll probably have some sort of a release status that goes on for 15 minutes every going forward, right now when we're targeting, and then we make adjustments, and then those things will be inputs.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, totally agree. Yep. We should look at the template, but I want to get to another topic, which is, I think, important once we finish the release part. So the patch release, this is again something we need to discuss. For now, it could be just for starters, right? For the first cut, it could be for ad hoc fixing of security vulnerabilities, other hot fixes that we think as a community is important. So that's the patch release, which is the x.y.z, the Z part of it, right? Yeah, please stop me if there are questions. So release branch strategy, this is nothing.
So the patch release,
Go ahead,
right?
yeah.
The patch
Yes.
release. On that one, since the maintenance is for 6 months, let's say it's a 3 months cadence, right? Let's taking that example. So since it's a 6 months maintenance, so that means up to 6 months, we can potentially be doing patch releases on that minor release.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then what that means is, I know you imply this. I just wanted to talk it out loud so that my understanding is also correct. So that means we could be backporting fixes.
Yes.
From 2 releases forward.
Yes, like because if you found, let's say we've found an issue in, let's say the current release, and it's a security vulnerability, and if it's applicable for the 2 releases that we are maintaining, we have to go and put that fix in all 3 releases, the one that we are working on, and then 2 releases that we are maintaining.
So, and then in addition to the security one, I also want to highlight the practical issues. So somebody may say, I'm using that release, I want that fix in that release, can you please have it? So I think
yes,
that may also happen. Yeah.
Yes, that may also happen. Yes, and that's where judgment also comes, right? Like depending on if it's a reasonable request or it's some of them could be unreasonable. So we have to make a judgment call as a community to figure out, right?
So obviously that has to gel well with the semantic versioning so that it shouldn't break anything. Yeah. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. So in the release branch strategy, I'm stating a little bit obvious thing. All the development in general will happen. So this is again, people could have different opinions here, but in general, all the development will happen in the master branch, and the release branches will be kind of cut from the master branch at a particular Git commit. So for example, let's say currently we all are working on a release. We'll go and submit PRs, and I'm thinking it'll get put into the master branch. And then let's say all the open issues are addressed, right? At that point, the release branch will be cut at a particular Git commit. Let's say, for example, on this date, right? Like something like this. We are all coding, right? So between March 14th and May 20th, all of us are developing, and all those features could go into the main branch, master branch, that is. And then on around, let's say, May 20th, we kind of cut a release branch. And from that point onwards, for 2 weeks, right? Any bug fixes, anything will go obviously in that release branch, and then we will release that will become the official release, and then the master branch will continue development for the next release. Yeah, go ahead, Vish.
Yeah, I mean, I recall OpenStack being very similar. Is Kubernetes also similar? Like what you're suggesting, is it something new, deviation from what Kubernetes does, or is it something similar?
I briefly looked at, again, I didn't spend too much time looking into Kubernetes, but from briefly what I saw in the release thing, they seem to be doing every 4-month release, right? And then before a final release happens, they have something called as alpha release, beta release, and then a final release happens for them for each minor release. So I didn't look close enough. I don't know if alpha release means they cut a branch at alpha release. Probably they do, and then they cut another branch for beta release, and then they cut a branch for the final release. But I presume the development will happen in the main branch. But yeah, I'm not entirely certain if this is whatever I'm proposing is exactly what KA is there. I'm not 100% sure. I think so.
Thank you.
But yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah, Wim, go ahead.
Confirmation.
Yeah, thank you, Vish. Wim, please go ahead.
Sorry, I should unmute. I was wondering about how people, so let's say the ownership, so who is, I think there will be, normally you have like a maintainer of a certain piece of software, and then you have people contributing to it. Do we need to assign roles
Yes,
to the
yes.
people?
Yes, we should talk
You're
about
getting, you're getting there, or
yes,
yeah,
I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Okay,
That's
then
the
I'll wait.
contribution
Yeah,
layer.
that's
Yes,
great.
yes. Yeah.
So one other point, since we are in this release threading branch topic, so probably one good thing to add here is as a process. So what will be the actual process once the release branch is cut? What is going to be the PR process and the review process to merge? I mean, it is based on my earlier experiences. The regular PR, right, that we merge in the before code freeze, it's a regular thing. Somebody will say LGTM and somebody has to approve, and then committer it will automatically merge, or committer could merge. But once the release is cut, I think the process was a little bit more stringent. So do we need to say anything about once the release is cut, let's say on your particular date, right? April 20th, the release is cut. May 1st is the release time. Whatever that. Sorry, May 20th is the release cut. So before the May 20th and June 1st, if there are any fixes that needs to go into that particular release branch, what is the PR process? That's probably we may need to.
No, that's very valid. We should definitely call it out more clearly what exactly happens, because you are right. What we intuitively we all know, but we need to document it, because during those 2 weeks it should be just I mean, of course, if a feature is broken and that we learned about it in these 2 weeks, we need to fix it, right? Yeah. And obviously, if there are crashes, security vulnerabilities, all that needs to be fixed. But anything other than this, if you want to enhance a feature that you developed, then we should just say no.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We can definitely document it. I'll take it in the notes.
Yeah. Basically, we need to have some guardrails and for the PR process.
Yes. After. We can certainly define it. Okay, good. We'll do that, Balaji. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so we were here, right? Go back. Okay, so but in principle, I'm hearing, if I'm not mistaken, this looks okay, right? Please do review, and if you think we can tweak the process, then yeah, I'm happy to revisit. Release versioning we already saw, but one thing we did not talk about is the release Nefio versions queue policy. So this is something we need to define clearly, because so let's say there is Nefio 1.0.0 and we have, let's say, Nefio 1.1.1. Can NF deploy controller from the 0.0 release work with the package variant controller from 1.1.0, right? So Kubernetes kind of calls this versions queue policy out as well. We need to call it out, because we cannot be certain how people will kind of use it. We cannot expect people to just take, let's say, a given Nefio release and use all the components from it all the time. They might, for whatever reasons, product reasons, they might want to mix and match between components across releases, right? So this queue policy will kind of help guide them, saying that, hey, you cannot use, let's say, NF topology controller from 1.0 and pick IPAM from 1.1 for whatever reason, right? If that's the case, we need to call it out. If not, we can say, hey, it's supported, right? So this is critical. I'll pause there. I know this is something we should discuss on. Any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point you raised, Urvin. My first thought was, obviously, we will not have this problem, at least in the first release. Obviously, everything is constant.
Right.
Is it, obviously, it's desirable in general, but is it something Nefio wants to do? I know it's desirable. Or Nephew, do we think Nephew just wants, it's more of a question rather than my opinion. It's a question for all of us here. At least in the next 1 year, let's say, right? So as Nephew, should we support this kind of a final granular component level matrix support, or do you think everybody should just take a release?
So I'll weigh in and then I'll let others weigh in also. Like in the initial, like you were suggesting, right? Next 6 months, this probably doesn't matter that much, right? Like 6 months to a year, assuming that's the time until somebody uses it in a product, right? And during that phase, it's not important. But after that, if it becomes a real product, then I'll give you an example of why this could be desirable for someone in a product, right? Like let's say some company kind of adopts Nephew and they go for, let's say 1.0.0. Now, for whatever product reasons they have, they want to go to 1.1.0, but they don't want to take the risk of updating whole Nephew. They just want, let's say, a new feature given by enough topology controller in 1.1, they want it, let's say, while minimizing the risk for their product. Because if they take whole of Nephew, that means there is a larger footprint of things to break in their product, right? So maybe they want enough topology controller, but everything else they want from the older release. So that could be one use case why this is desirable, like you said. But in the initial phase, I don't think it's important. Like me, next 6 months to a year, definitely it's not important in my opinion. Tal has his hands raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with all of that. I'll just add another consideration that it's not SIG number 3 or even just the SIGs that will decide on versions and what they mean. The TSC, and to an extent, even Linux Foundation has some ownership of the versioning, right? A lot of this is tied to press releases that come out with each version, announcing to the community as a whole, and journalists talk about this too. If you look at other Linux Foundation and LFN projects, every release is coupled with a kind of media blitz to showcase the progress of the project, right? So I think the TSC will want to be involved in deciding releases and what releases mean generally beyond the semantic versioning that we put, right? But obviously the feedback from us is very important because we want to say, well, what does a new major release or a minor release mean in terms of users of Nephew and integration points, right? A big part is, of course, the APIs, right? Our CRDs and what they mean, right? It's not just new functionality that's being added. Maybe a major new release of Nephew would require equipment integrations and platform integrations to be updated as well, right? So a lot of it is involved, I think, in releases, but we can start with something, and maybe the postmortem also should be expressed to the TSC, you know, as part of our the SIG's announcement, right? An in-depth look of how a Nephew release could be.
Right. So Tal, if I were to just paraphrase what you said, right? So you're not talking about this specifically. You're talking more about this, right? Like what is the release cadence that we should, and also what X means, what Y means, what Z means in the X.Y.Z, and because that is critical for like PR stuff and everything. So this is what I was thinking. Tal, tell me if this is what you're thinking also. Like once we in SIG 3 agree on a release cycle duration and what at least roughly the release process is, we should run it by TSC. Like for example, if all of us agree 3 months, then we'll go to TSC and kind of talk through, hey, you know, X.Y.Z is how the versioning is going to look like. This is what major means. This is what minor means. This is the duration, and get their blessing, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I know you wrote it here already. I'm not adding a new point. I'm just circling back to the top point.
Okay, okay. No, just trying to understand. Okay, makes sense. So we will do that, right? Okay. Got it. Wim? Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, Aravind, so basically on the point of the skew, right? The skew.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons I think of the value of Kubernetes has been, at least from my point of view, and this of course depends on how much dependency we build into the main platform. And so far we are trying to avoid as much as these dependencies as we can. But as a product, if you can upgrade it as a whole and minimize the impact, so that comes back to how backward compatible our APIs are. We should design it in such a way that people should not be afraid to upgrade. So as such, I'm advocating to avoid this picking a SKU of X, Y, and Z because first of all, for us as a Nefio community to test this, it's horrible.
I'll tell you this, Wim. I couldn't agree with you more, right? Like, but what I'm saying is, if that is the decision we are making, we need to call it out, right? Clearly say that would be our version. That would be our version SKU policy. We will say that, hey, if you're updating Nefio, you have to update everything, right? But I'm just saying that I don't know how things will evolve, and like this is something we need to be very conscious. And my biggest problem with SKUs is also the testing part of it, testing, qualifying, and then triaging the issues that come of these different SKUs is going to be very hard, right? And so I'm with you on that.
I think, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
We've been talking about modeling too elsewhere. So CRDs do have API versions, right? It's unfortunately a feature that's not used enough. I've seen many projects just upgrade the API without actually bumping the version of the CRDs. You probably know that CRDs are created by default as V1 Alpha 1. It's amazing to me how many projects out there stay that way and never change it. They just accept it as something there. So we can take that CRD versioning more seriously. However, the problem with this, it's a version per CRD. If we change models, the structure of the models, then that of course can't follow through. So we might need to change the names to make sure that there's no conflict with older versions of CRDs. And then we have to decide if our controllers will support both versions, right? So there are a lot of technical considerations here. Backwards compatibility is always a nightmare, right? It's as everybody here is pointing out, if we add backwards compatibility to Nefio, everything becomes much harder, from SIG2 to SIG3 testing, etc. So I think we definitely want to avoid it early on. At some point, it might become necessary, right? If, say, a certain version of Nefio, say version 4, right, becomes used in actual deployments, and that becomes a touch point for us, we need to support version 4 carefully moving forwards. At version 6, we still want to support version 4 modeling to make sure that current deployments, they don't break. It will be a wonderful problem to have, right? We don't have it quite yet. But I agree that we should put a placeholder here. I think this is great. We need to consider it. And for now, I don't think we have a strong opinion, but we have a placeholder to putting
for the next 1 year. Honestly, we don't care about SKUs because we'll be evolving so fast that we will break, obviously. So which is fine. This is more like something to think about. Sorry, I think I cut off someone. No, please go ahead.
No, Arvind, I was going to say the same thing like you said. We don't. I think you covered that. I think it's good to have that here. I think we can mention it for the short term, at least for a year. We don't need to worry about it, but this is something to consider beyond that.
Maybe I'll just add a point here to the text that something about backwards compatibility. I think that's kind of the key issue regarding our SKU policy. What is Nefio's commitment to backwards compatibility as a whole? We don't have that commitment right now.
But that's why I think we should spend enough time to make the CRDs good enough that we don't have to break it. So that's why it's important, I think, to spend enough time on trying to get them. But okay, but the issue which we have right now is that we only.
I think that's a great intent, but it should be okay. I'm pretty sure it will be. We will break it.
No, we will break. I understand.
Once the commercial network function vendors start supporting, we'll start breaking. They will have a lot of requirements. I hope. Wim, I think you can help us a lot from that regard because you are from Nokia.
That's what I'm trying to do. So that's what I'm trying to do to avoid it as much. But okay, we'll see. Yeah, time will tell.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm actually opposite to Wim here, and I say I'm going to quote some Mark Zuckerberg, ideas for Facebook and Meta that move quickly and break things. I think at this early stage,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I think we're all in alignment.
At the moment, it's not a problem, but I think, yeah, at the moment we are in good shape. We should, have a bit of guardrails around
Cool.
it.
So we are out of time. So maybe we can continue this next week. Is that okay?
Yeah, Arvind, I think, thank you for doing this. It's been a great exercise. Thank you. I think we should continue next week. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Great work.
Wait, do we have a weekly cadence right now?
No.
Oh, so
No.
it'll be in 2 weeks.
So should we change it? So I know the chairs are not here. I feel SIG release has to happen a little bit more often.
I have to agree. I think at least until R1, we would probably be much better served by a weekly cadence. So we could probably suggest this on Slack and see what the chairs think.
So
Okay,
one other thing also is to also figure out, are we not getting enough responses on Slack? Because I know there were those days in IRC. We used to use IRC for OpenStack, and we did get things moving forward. I don't mind blocking off another extra hour, but can we try to see how we can activate our Slack channels
A bit
So
more.
what-
I agree with that. I agree with that because at the end of the day, they are there. I see at the moment most of the work happens in the meetings, but in reality, we should do as much work outside of the meeting as in the meeting, at least as a starting point.
Yeah, I would want the meetings to be more like status update and like saying like, hey, this is something new I wanted to present. If with these two automation meetings going on, it's more of like 1 or 2 people talking, right? So it's not that I'm jealous of that, but it's more about like having more about dialogue happening, sort of, which happens very nice in Slack channel or IRC channels,
So
and
Vish,
it's asynchronous.
sorry, I'm just really trying to understand. So are you saying that people sometimes when we ping, there is no response? Is that what you're saying, or is it just the culture of not?
No, I'm
working?
just saying, why don't we use a Slack channel where we want anything? You can say, hey, this is the document. Please go, guys, take a look at it. Start putting your comments, and let's start using.
No, but the thing is, like for example, right? I mean, just to give this particular example, this doc was pinged in the Slack, but I'm just trying to see like how can we can ping and ask folks to look at it, but there's no guarantee that folks will look at it, right? Like it's personal preference, their timeline, their own thing. So how do we? Are you suggesting anything beyond that, Vish? We are happy to ping docs, or we should all do that for sure.
Yeah.
But how can we cannot enforce that though, right? Like it's more like
But see, we cannot enforce anything. But at the end of the day, if you let's say ping and you see the work is done and we make a decision, right? Okay, we make a decision. If people are part of the community, that if you want to influence, you have to spend at least some time to around it to be able to do so. Otherwise, the things have moved on, right? And so the people who want to handle, they have to spend a bit of their time to try to evolve the thing, because otherwise we don't move forward either, right?
Right. No, I agree.
The other question I have about repeating this in a weekly cadence is SIG Automation is also having weekly meeting now. Or
They have 2, right?
Twice semi-weekly even, and we may conflict in time because all that.
Yeah. So SIG Automation is Tuesday, Wednesday. So hopefully we should not conflict, but still we have to run it by everyone to see if folks even want another meeting. But personally, I feel SIG Release, there is a lot for us to do in terms of test infrastructure, process, and everything. And this is important for velocity of.
So do you have a plan? I think you and Steven are going to have a plan, list of tasks and all the stuff that can get published and people can sign up, right? That is one way that we can try also.
Yes. So at the end of this doc, I didn't put create issues yet because I wanted to have this discussion first and see if folks agree with the overall approach, because a lot of the work items are going to be based on this approach, right? So I just wanted to make sure people agree at a high level on what we are proposing, what I'm proposing. And then if that's the case, then the work items. So what I did was I put the work items. I've also put the t-shirt sizing on how big that work is, right? And all of this will translate into issues in GitHub. But I wanted to have this discussion. Maybe one more similar meeting, we can finish this doc, and then we can go into work items where we can talk through what each work item is, because folks need to understand the gravity of each work item also, right?
Correct. That's true.
So a discussion would be good. And after the discussion is done, then definitely, yes, all of this will translate into GitHub issues. And then we'll have to find, I left the owner empty. So if already folks are interested and they know fully well what each of this means, please go sign up for it in this doc also, and then you will be assigned an issue, right? But yeah, maybe one more meeting, I think, then we can get to that level, I think.
Okay, so if you are thinking that you probably need one more meeting, ad hoc meeting to actually go through this.
Yeah, I think that's
a one-off rather than
Yeah,
actually having a regular one. Okay.
Yeah. For now, maybe it's a one-off.
Yeah.
Just schedule one, finish this doc, get to issues, and I want to make sure all of us can work in parallel on these issues.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. When this meeting is needed for especially this initial phase where we are finalizing the process.
Right.
So I think that is definitely needed. For example, there are some valid questions in this document about how are we going to do, how are we going to manage issues that are cross-cutting across SIG, things like that. So I think
exactly,
let's discuss that, let's finalize it, and then probably we can all jump on the GitHub issues at that point of time once we have the clarity.
Yes. I'll tell you high level where a lot of help is needed in the test infrastructure side. I feel there is a lot of good work we all can do. And a lot of the work items you will see is in the test infrastructure side more than anything else. But yeah, we can talk more in the next. I'll try to see if I can set up an ad hoc meeting with all the folks in SIG Release, and hopefully this week, and then we'll see. I'll also ping in Slack with some time suggestions, and you can all weigh in.
Probably you can shoot for the same timeline next Monday. That's also.
Okay, yeah, that's a good start. At least I know that folks' calendar seems relatively free this time, right? Okay, yeah, I'll propose that and then get feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Balaji.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Take care.
Yeah,
right.
thank you for sharing. Great.
Yeah,
Great
thank
work.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah, bye.